एवरीवन, वेलकम टू माय यूट्यूब चैनल द सोलफुल डायरी। आज के वीडियो में हम बात करेंगे एडमंड स्पेंसर और उनकी एपिक पोम द फेरी क्वीन के बारे में। बट पोम को डिस्कस करने से पहले जान लेते हैं पोएट के बारे में। चलिए अब एडमंड स्पेंसर के बारे में डिस्कस करते हैं। एडमंड स्पेंसर जो है उनकी बर्थ हुई थी लंदन में इन द ईयर 1552 और 1553। उनके फैमिली या चाइल्डहुड के बारे में हमें ज़्यादा नहीं पता है, बट हमें ये पता है कि उन्हें स्कॉलरशिप मिली थी टू अटेंड द मर्चेंट टेलर स्कूल वेयर ही लाइकली स्टडीड लेटिन एंड ग्रीक। और फिर वो लिटरेचर स्टडी करने के लिए, लिटरेचर रिलीजन स्टडी करने के लिए कैम्ब्रिज यूनिवर्सिटी पेम्ब्रोक हॉल, रिसीविंग अ BA in 1573 and MA in 1576। उनकी जो फर्स्ट वॉल्यूम है पोइट्री की द शेफर्ड्स कैलेंडर in 1579 dedicating it to poet सर फिलिप सिडनी। वो उन्होंने किसको? सर फिलिप सिडनी को डेडिकेट किया। क्या? द शेफर्ड्स कैलेंडर। और वो किस चीज़ के होता था? द फेरी क्वीन, अ मेजर English epic and Emirati and epithelium, a sonnet sequence dedicated to his second wife Elizabeth Boyle। और पोइट्री के अलावा स्पेंसर ने क्या करियर पॉलिटिक्स में बनाया, serving as a secretary first for the Bishop of Rochester and then for the Earl of Leicester, who introduced him to other poets and artists in Queen Elizabeth's court. In 1580, he was appointed secretary to the Lord Deputy of Ireland. Later, in 1596, he wrote an inflammatory pamphlet called A View of the Present State of Ireland. 1598 में during the 9 Years' War, Spenser was driven from his home in Ireland. He died in London in 1599 and was buried in Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey. द फेरी क्वीन को इन डेप्थ डिस्कस करने से पहले हम लोग जान लेते हैं उसके कुछ की फीचर्स। It is an allegorical poem that emerged in the late 16th century and it is one of the longest poems even today. Edmund Spenser was a contemporary of great writers like William Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, but despite the overflow of talent in that era, Spenser still managed to gain some notoriety when Queen Elizabeth I granted him a lifetime pension of £50 a year for his work. फेरी क्वीन जो है एक वर्क है रेनेसां लिटरेचर का जो 6 पार्ट्स में डिवाइडेड है। ऑल्दो जो स्पेंसर उन्होंने टोटल इसके 12 पार्ट्स प्लान किए थे। फर्स्ट ही जो है वो completed circa 1589 when they were presented to the queen and published a year later। मतलब कब पब्लिश हुए थे? 1590 में। 1596 the 3 volumes were republished along with the 3 that followed। Spenser had originally planned on writing 12 volumes total but died before his work was complete। Fragments of 7th volume still survive। तो जो प्लॉट है, several knights each of which embodies a different virtue। These virtues for the 6 volumes are holiness, temperaments, chastity, friendship, justice, courtesy। It appears that virtue for the unfinished 7th volume would have been on constancy। It is unknown what the virtues would have been for the remaining 5 volumes, but it is clear that 2 virtues were embodied by the characters of Gloriana, the Faerie Queen herself, and Arthur, that of glory and magnificence, respectively. The poem is highly allegorical, often containing allusions to the theological and political ideology of the day. Some characters direct form representing certain virtues or sins. Some, like one of the primary antagonists, Duessa, represent that Catholic Church. Others, like the Faerie Queen herself, represented Queen Elizabeth. It was very clear that Spenser wanted to get on the good side of the Queen and her nobility. Indeed, the poem starts with a lengthy letter to Sir Walter Raleigh, probably a sponsor for the book. The Spenserian stanza. The Faerie Queene is notable for being composed entirely in a new rhyming stanza invented by Spenser himself, and therefore now called the Spenserian stanza. It contains 9 lines with the iambic pentameter. The first 8 have 5 pentameters and ninth has 6. The rhyme scheme A B A B B C B C C. The Faerie Queene contains over 2000 of these stanzas. क्योंकि ये जो है 6 पार्ट्स में डिवाइडेड है, तो हम लोग सभी पार्ट्स की समरीज जानेंगे और क्या मतलब कौन सी बुक का क्या वर्च्यू. बुक 1, Chief Virtue, Holiness. Our main characters are the Red Cross Knight, so named for a red cross on his shield and armor, and Una Princess, whose home has been beset by a dragon. Together with a dwarf companion, they are setting out to defeat the dragon at the behest of the Faerie Queene. Together they encounter many adventures, starting with a monstrous beast called an Error. Later they are separated by the magician Archimago, who deceives the Red Cross Knight into thinking that Una has been unfaithful. The Red Cross Knight is later enchanted by the sorceresses Tuasa and taken to the House of Pride, where his holiness is eroded. He then goes to the castle of Orgoglio, a giant who imprisons him for months. Thankfully, Una has found help in Prince Arthur and they help spring the Red Cross Knight from his prison and kill the giant. But the Red Cross Knight is in bad shape, and after nearly killing himself whilst battling a demon called Despair, he and Una go to a place called the House of Holiness. In the House of Holiness, the Red Cross Knight is able to heal from both his physical and emotional wounds, after which he is ready to battle the dragon. It is also at this point that we discover that the Red Cross Knight is actually St. George of Legend. St. George fights the dragon, wins, and the entire country is freed. To the joy of Una, St. George and Una are betrothed before he goes to continue working for the Faerie Queene. Book 2, इसका chief virtue क्या है? Temperaments. Our main character in book 2 is Sir Gawain, a knight known for his temperaments or self-mastery in all things. He's accompanied by the Palmer, a religious pilgrim who also acts as a guide. Together they find a tragic couple and their baby. The husband, a knight named Sir Mordaunt, is dead and his wife Amalia has just plunged a dagger into her heart. She tells them that a temptress named Acrasia had lured her husband away via sorcery and then cursed him when Amavia tried to help him escape. When Amavia dies, she is survived by her baby son, whom Gawain takes and brings to a castle run by a woman named Medina. She is the middle and represents temperaments as well, with her older and younger sisters represent two other extremes. Goan continues to have adventures that reflect the theme of temperaments. He stops a madman from killing a young squire. He tames a man named Pyrocles, who is too eager for a fight, and he ignores the wiles of Phaedria as she tries to tempt him to stay on her island, but he nearly loses when he is separated pa- from the Palmer and runs into Memnon, a representation of greed. Memnon takes him to the underworld and tempts him with all the riches of the world. Guan ignores this but is so tired when he reaches the real world again that he passes out. Guan might have died by the hand of Pyrocles and his brother, had not the Palmer and Prince Arthur showed up. Together they all go to help a woman named Alma, then Gon and the Palmer continue on their way. Ultimately, they end up at the Bower of Bliss, a false paradise where Arcasia rules, and they manage to capture Arcasia to take her to the Faerie Queene. Book 3, Chief Virtue, Chastity. The third book of the Faerie Queene centers around the theme of chastity. Appropriately, there are multiple characters that represent different aspects of chastity. Chief among these are Britomart, who defends chastity through fighting, Belfort, who defends chastity by hunting perverse men, Florimel, who represents chastity by fleeing away from sex, Amoret, who represents the forced loss of chastity through rape, Malacasta, who represents a complete lack of chastity. Guan and Arthur are traveling from their adventures in the last book when they run into Britomart, who manages to knock Guan off his horse. Eventually, though Guan and Arthur run off after Florimel, after she rides past pursued by the forester, there are a few storylines going on here. Britomart continues on and runs into Melista's castle, where she saves the Red Frost Knight from being beaten up. When Melista develops a crush on her, she runs off and doesn't look back. Florimel is running from being chased by one man to another. Eventually, she runs into a witch and her son, and the son falls in love with her, but she runs off before anything can come of it. The witch sends a monster after her, and she barely manages to escape by jumping into a boat guided by an old man. The old man eventually tries to assault her, and she's saved by Proteus, who then also tries to assault her. Then she's imprisoned for some time. Saturn is trying to find Florimel and runs into the monster that attacked her. He manages to defeat it, but is distracted by a giant carrying a square. He saves the square and then also run into a knight named Paradil. Together they travel until they arrive at Malbeco's castle. Then Britomart shows up again, and when Malbeco refuses to let them in, they beaten to burn the gate down. So Malbeco lets them in, and Paradil seduces his wife, and they run off in the morning. Britomart continues on her own and runs into Scudamore, who is nearly dead with grief for losing his love, Amoret. Britomart then travels to Buziren's castle and rescues Amoret from horrible torture. Book 4 is a little different than some of the others, adds more a continuation of book 3 than a new book. Its focus knights don't really take up that big of a role, and instead it focuses on characters we have already met, such as Britomart, Brit and Amoret, who she rescued in the last book, are traveling together, though for some reason Amarat doesn't know that Britomart is a woman and is fearful of her. They come across a tournament where the victor get to complete for ladies, possessing them if they win. Super not progressive. One man wants Amaret and Brit fights him and wins. Later she reveals she's a woman and Amaret is now okay with being her companion. They continue traveling and come across the villain Duessa, who is traveling with Eight, who is a very horrible person by her description. They also traveling with two knights, Blandamore and Paradil, who we met in the last book. Britomart and Amaret manage to ride off, but another knight, Squadamore, also runs into the bad guys and has some problems with them. For one, he's tricked into thinking that his love, Amadat, is being disloyal to him. He runs off all in a huff. Blandamore and Paradil continue on their way until they find a knight named Sir Ferroc, who we learn had been the one to steal the false Florimel. Blandamore decides Florimel is one hot babe, so he easily defeats Sir Ferroc for her hand. Paradil, who hadn't cared up to this point, now becomes jealous when he sees Blandamore and false Florimel flirting with each other, so he and Blandamore fight for a long time until who shows up but the Square of James, who we met in the last book. The Square is surprised to find Florimel with them, since he thinks she is far away, which the real Florimel is, and tells them that there's a tournament where they could compete for Florimel's girdle, currently held by Sir Saturn. This idea placates the two fighting knights, and they all set out to find this tournament. On the way, they encounter two knights named Campbell and Triamond with their respective ladies, Campbell and Kanaki. These are two characters for which the book is named, the two knights that are supposed to represent friendship. We get a lengthy explanation about where they came from and how they ended up together. Turns out Triamond used to have two brothers with him, and the three of them were all in love with Kanakis, who is Campbell's sister, and they all decided to fight Campbell to determine who is the best and should marry Kanaki. Campbell kills Triamon's two brothers, but their spirits enter into Triamon, giving him extra strength but two extra lives in a very Super Mario type turn of events, which to be ahead of his times Mr. Spenser, but Mr. Campbell has a magic ring that makes him heal quickly, so the two are pretty evenly matched for a while. They fight until Triamon's sister shows up and asks them to stop fighting. Campbell becomes enamored with Trimon's sister. So, long story short, he ends up with her, and Trimon and with Skanaki, and the two become best friends forever. So now it's just four of them, which is where they run into Paradel and Blandamore. Rather than fight each other, they all proceed to the tournament to duke out any of their problems there. The tournament has a lot of fighters. At first, Saturday wins the day, wounding Triamon, then Campbell, and Triamon seem to be doing well, but later another knight steps in, and this knight is none other than Artegall. Though we don't know it yet, turns out Tritomart is also participating and no one knows who she is either. She fights Artegall, not knowing that they are destined to be lovers, and she knocks him on his you know what and wins the day. Saturn, Campbell, Triamond, and Ritomort are all considered victors, but Ritomort is voted the best. Also, Florimell's girdle doesn't stay fastened around a false Florimell because it is apparently magic and only work for virtuous women. The only woman it stays fastened around is Amoret. But even though the girdle didn't stick, false Florimell is voted most beautiful and is therefore awarded to Britomort, the best knight. But Britomort would rather have Amoret, so false Florimell eventually goes with all people Bragdocio who had appeared earlier. Britomart and Amoret continue on their way to find Artegall, who they didn't know was actually at the tournament, and Squadamore, who is still out there with Gloss, convinced that Amarat and Ritomart have a thing together. Scudamore and Gloss are traveling and stay in a cave where they find a blacksmith named Care who gives you bad dreams. He is somehow hurt in a spiritual way by this man, and he continues traveling the next day in a foul mood. Soon he comes on Artegall, who is seeking Britomart to have revenge on her for whipping his butt in the tournament. When Squadamore figures out this is the same person he thinks has Amarat, they decide to conspire together. At that moment, Britomart shows up without Amarat and they all get into a fight. Eventually, Frit's helmet is knocked off and she's revealed as a beautiful woman. Artegall and Squadamore stop what they are doing and Britomart finally sees Artegall's face. They all go off to search for Amarat, who Britomart somehow lost, and return Artegall start to fall in love. Turns out Amaret has been accosted by a savage man who rapes his victim. She and two other women held by the savage man are rescued by Arthur's old squire Timias and Amaret's sister Belphube. After a brief side note involving a miscommunication between Timias and Belphube, we find that Arthur shows up to find Amarat Amelia, one of the other women who was kidnapped by the savage man near death. He helps them and they have some adventure together until Amelia is reunited with her lover. Later, Arthur is riding with Emerald and they come across a bunch of knights who are all fighting for the love of Florimel as well as Britomart and Squadamore. When the knights turn on Britomart, Arthur intervenes and calms everyone down. Squadamore is then asked how he and Amaret get together. Squadamore tells a rather out there story of how he had won a shield from a bunch of knights, which somehow meant that he claimed Amaret's love. He then let Amaret out of a temple of Venus after having gone through various trials of which Amaret is the prize even though she doesn't want to go. Heads up, there's some feminist problems in this part. But remember, Florimel, the real Florimel. Well, she's been tucked away in a cave for all this time at the whim of Proteus. Her love, if you recall, was Marinel, who had been injured by Brit, but one day it so happens that Marinel's mother, Kymodoc, is attending a big ocean river party which just happens to be hosted by Proteus. Marinel goes with her, though he has to wait outside because he's half mortal. While there, he hears Florimel's voice and falls in love. Over the next little while, he's literally sick with love, and once his mother finds out why, she goes to Neptune for help. Neptune agrees to get Florimel out of Proteus' lair and she's taken to Marinel. 5. Book 5 tells the story of Artegall, Britomart's love, who we met in the last book. He's a knight of justice, which is a theme for this book. He has been tasked by the Faerie Queene to accompany a lady named Arena to free her and from land from a Traian named Grantorto. Apart from the two of them, they also have a person called Talus, who is kind of a robot. On the way, they run into a square crying over the headless body of a lady. The square tells them that he had been traveling with another lady who was carried off by a knight. This nefarious knight had a lady with him and he had cut off her head. So Artegall, being the just man that he is, demands to know where he can find this knight, avenge the dead lady, and bring back the live one. Artegall sends Talus after the knight, who easily finds him, knocks him out, and brings both of him and the lady back to Artegall. The knight is named Sanglier, and he claims that the square killed the lady. Artegall acts as arbiter and suggests, like King Solomon, that they cut the lady live in half so each one can take a portion. Of course, the knight is okay with this, but the square is mortified, thus cluing Artegall as to who is in the right. Sanglier is punished by having to carry the dead lady's head everywhere. They run into a dwarf who belongs to Florimel. The dwarf tells them that Florimel is safe about to marry Marinel and they are all happy about this, but the dwarf has been trying to get past a Saracen who blocks a bridge, so Artegall helps him, kills the man. Talus also kills the man's daughter, and they all go on their way. They later come across a giant who wants to make land, air, and water as equal. Article gets into a heated debate about whether this is a good thing, which also kind of turns into an argument about equality in general. With Article arguing about it, Talus kills the giant, then also kills all the people who protest at this. Talus is kind of scary. While traveling, they come across Bragdocio with a false Florimel. Article is upset that Florimel is with another man when she is supposed to be with Marinel. But as they come to where Marinel and Florimel were supposed to be married, they find he's fighting a bunch of men for the real Florimel's hand. Article steps in and helps. Bragdocio later reveals that false Florimel and everyone is astounded, but false Florimel melts away when she comes into contact with the real Florimel. Oddly, at that moment, Sir Gawain shows up and attacks Bragdocio for stealing his horse way back in book 2. So Talus punishes Bragdocchio by breaking his armor, marking his face, and exposing him as a crowd. After serving as arbiter for some other people, Artegall comes across some warlike women who are about to hang a man. He stops them, and the man, Sir Turpine, tells them that about an Amazon woman who makes men dress in women's clothing and do women's work and are hanged if they resist, which is what Artegall just prevented. Turpine leads them to the Amazons, and Artegall and Talus fight them all day until the Amazon leader asks to face Artegall in single combat the next day. Well, Artegall loses the fight because he won't hurt a woman, so he's forced to wear women's clothing like all the rest. However, it turns out both the Amazon leader and her maid both develop crushes on Artegall, who has none of it because he's loyal to Britomart, which is the perfect transition to come back to Britomart. She's worried about Artegall, and then one day they runs into Talus, who had escaped from the Amazons. She goes on a rampage to find him, killing several people in the process who tried to stop her. After a brief stop at a temple of Isis, of all people, she eventually kills the Amazon queen, barely stops Talus from exterminating all the rest, and rescues Artegall. But Artegall is determined to continue on his original quest, so Britomart mopes about wishing she could be with him more. As Artegall continues, he saves a woman from two knights with the help of Arthur, who also shows up. The lady says that two knights had belonged to an evil lady named Adixia, who had sent the two knights after the girl after she had brought them a message of peace. Artegall and Arthur decide they are going to help the lady and her good queen by taking out the bad lady and her evil husband. So Arthur and Artegall dress up and as the two dead knights. They go back to the evil castle, and Arthur fights its king, named Sultan, to the death. Adicia seeks revenge and goes crazy, eventually roaming the world and becoming a tiger. Artegall chases out all the evil people, and he and Arthur claim the place. They eventually accompany the lady they had previously rescued, named Samine, to her queen, Queen Mercula. While traveling, Saminet tells them of another villain nearby, and naturally Arthur and Artegall want to do something about him, so they take care of that monster as well. Side quest complete. When they finally arrive at Marcella's place, who just happened to be judging an important trial of none other than Duessa from book 1 to 3, after presenting all the evidence, everyone agrees that she is guilty. While they're hanging out at Marcella's castle, several young men arrive and tell them of a tyrant that they want help getting rid of. Arthur decides to go with them and, as one might expect, rids the land of the tyrant. He then fights a large sphinx-like monster and destroys it as well. But Artegall has finally gotten back to the original quest he started the book with, to help princess named Irene to get rid of a tyrant named Grand Toto. He first finds out that Irene has been taken captive by Grand Toto and will be executed in 10 days. And if he doesn't do something about it after a brief side mission, where Artegall argues with a knight about losing his shield, a big no-no, and Talus slaughters a bunch of peasants. They take a ship to Iron's land, probably Ireland. Artegall has several battles against Grand Otto and his men, but eventually he kills the tyrant and puts Irene back to on the rightful throne. But as they are proceeding back to the Faerie Queene, they are attacked by some monstrous people, including a big multi-headed monster called the Blatant Beast. But Artegall chooses to simply ignore them somehow and proceed on his merry way. Book 6. The theme of Book 6 is courtesy, though it is really more about not being slothful, which we will see in a bit. A knight is Sir Calidor, who starts out the book by running into Artegall, who has just escaped from the Blatant Beast, which is perfect because Calidor is searching for this beast. Artegall tells him what he knows, and the two part ways. Calidor continues his quest until he runs into a castle where all women and men are shaved to make a blanket of human hair gross. Calidor defeats the main lord of the castle, beats him, and sets everything right. Next, Calidor comes across a lady and a young man who had just killed a knight. The young man and the lady tell him that the knight deserved to die since he was dragging the lady along forcibly as he rode on horseback. Apparently, he had come across another knight lady pair and had so desired this new lady that he would wounded the other knight. And when the lady he desired ran off, he became so mad that he began abusing his own lady. So Calidor agrees the knight deserved to die. Also turns out this young man who killed the knight is none other than Tristan from the Tristan and Isolde legends. Calidor catches up with the wounded knight and his lady and helps them get settled back at their home before setting off again. He later finds a knight named Celepine and his lady Serena, but they are attacked by the blatant beast who nearly kills Serena. Calidor chases after the beast and Celepine tries to help his love, taking her to a castle where a very rude knight forbids them entrance. He eventually fights with this knight and also a wild man shows up to help her. Anyway, Celepine is doing better, but Serena is not. So one day, Celepine is wandering around and sees a bear carrying a human child in its mouth. So he follows and kills the bear to save the child, but he becomes lost in the process. As he's trying to get back to civilization, he comes across a woman named Matilda who is crying because she has no hair. Celepine feels bad for her, so he gives her the baby he conveniently found and continues on to try and find Serena again. Meanwhile, Serena is hanging out with the savage or wild man looking for Celepine when they come across Prince Arthur and his squire Timaeus. Timaeus, who had previously been living happily with Bellerophon, had been lured away and wounded by the blatant beast. They agreed to team up to look for a cure for both Timaeus and Serena, who can't be cured by regular means. They arrive at a hermitage and leave the two wounded people with the hermit. Arthur and the wild man continue on their own. The hermit tells Timaeus and Serena that their real illness is that they just need to live good, virtuous lives and they will be fine, which is actually true. So they cure right up and continue traveling together. Meanwhile, Arthur and the wild man go to avenge Serena of the hurt done to her by the rude knight for not helping them earlier. Arthur and the wild man beat this knight and stay the night in his castle, but the rude knight is still alive and plotting his revenge. This rude knight, by the way, is called Turpine. Turpine pursues Arthur and the wild man but ends up failing and getting hurt, hung upside down from a tree for his treachery. Meanwhile, Serena and Timaeus find a poor woman named Mirabella being harassed by a giant named Disdain and a fool named Scorn. Timaeus tries to help but ends up getting knocked out by Disdain. Serena runs away in fear. Mirabella and Timaeus later get saved by Arthur, the wild man, and another knight. Poor Serena eventually gets picked up by cannibals and is barely saved by her lover, Celepine, right before she's about to be offered as a sacrifice to some pagan god. But we need to get back to Calidor. The knight has been tracking the blatant beast for a while now. Exhausted from his chase, he spends some time recovering with a family of shepherds. Turns out his family has a daughter named Pastorella, and Calidor falls over her heels for her. He ends up spending quite some time with these people, eventually gaining Pastorella's favor but earning the jealousy of her suitors, particularly a man named Coridon. One day, Calidor comes across a bunch of fairy ladies dancing on a beautiful hill, and unfortunately he startles them and they run away. One of these was apparently Glorina, the Faerie Queene herself. When Calidor comes back, Pastorella is attacked by a tiger and Calidor saves her, commenting her love for him, but unfortunately that love is not the last because Pastorella and her whole family is later taken by bandits. Calidor meets Coridon, who has escaped the bandits and is told that a fight had broken out among the bandits, and Coridon assumes everyone, including Pastorella, is dead. Calidor is mortified at this news, but they decide to go to the bandits on the off chance and they should still be alive. And so Calidor and Corridon rescue her, kills a lot of bandits and set everything right. Calidor leaves Pastorella in the care of a nice noble couple he knows that leaves to find a blatant beast. Turns out Pastorella is the long lost daughter of this couple. So that worked out splendidly. Calidor ends up finding the blatant beast, defeating him, tying him up and parading him around the fairyland, though it is said that one day the blatant beast will escape. Themes. The Faerie Queene by Edmund Spenser explores various themes with a central focus on the allegorical representation of virtues and the struggle against vice. The poem uses 6 knights, each representing a specific virtue to delve into the themes. Key themes include holiness, temperaments, chastity, friendship, justice and courtesy. Virtues and their allegories. Holiness, represented by the Red Cross Knight, the theme explores the journey of faith, repentance and spiritual growth. Temperaments, embodied by Sir Gawain, the theme emphasizes self-control and moderation in the face of temptation and indulgence. Chastity, Britomart, a female knight, embodies chastity, highlighting the importance of purity and faithfulness. Justice, represented by Artegall, this theme explores the complexities of justice, fairness, and the rule of law. Courtesy, Calidor, the Knight of Courtesy, demonstrates the importance of good manners, social grace, and ethical conduct. Friendship, while not explicitly defined as the other virtues in the first 6 books, friendship and loyalty are also important aspects of the poem. Allegory and symbolism. Spenser uses allegory extensively to represent abstract concepts like virtues, vices, and moral dilemmas through concrete characters and situations. The poem is rich in symbolism, with characters, setting, and events often carrying deeper meaning beyond their literal sense. Religion. The poem reflects the religious landscape of the Elizabethan era with a strong emphasis on Protestant values and idols. Spenser often contrasts Christian virtues with the dangers of sin, temptation, and adultery. Politics. The Faerie Queene can be interpreted as a political allegory celebrating Queen Elizabeth I and the Tudor dynasty. The poem also explores themes of national identity, duty, and the ideal of a just, virtuous ruler. Deception and lies. Spenser highlights the prevalence of deception and falsehoods in the world, emphasizing the importance of discernment and truthfulness. Friendship. The poem explores various forms of love, including romantic love, familial love, and platonic love. Friendship, loyalty, and the bonds between individuals are also important aspects of the poem. The role of women. The Faerie Queene features strong female characters like Britomart and Lorena, challenging traditional gender roles and exploring the potential of women. The poem Good versus Evil. The poem presents a continuous struggle between good and evil, with knights representing virtue battling against monsters, villains, and temptations. थैंक यू। आई होप आज की वीडियो आपको पसंद है। कैसी लगे हमें कमेंट करके बताएं और हमें ये भी कमेंट करके बताएं कि आप आने वाले वीडियोस किस टॉपिक पर देखना चाहते हैं। अगर वीडियो अच्छी लगी तो लाइक, शेयर एंड सब्सक्राइब टू माय चैनल। मिलते हैं कल एक और इन्फॉर्मेटिव वीडियो के साथ शाम 4 बजे। टिल देन कीप वॉचिंग एंड कीप सपोर्टिंग द सोलफुल डायरी। थैंक यू।